The sound of my front door slamming still haunts me. It wasn't just any ordinary slam. It was the kind of sound that reverberates through your bones, the kind that tells you something has been broken that might never be fixed. My 17-year-old son Jake had just stormed out of our house, screaming words that still echo in my nightmares. "I wish you were dead." 3 hours later, when he came back to apologize, I had vanished without a trace. What he found instead would shatter him completely and change our family forever. Hi, I'm Lisa Brown, and this is the story of the worst day of my life, the day I almost destroyed my family by trying to save it. If you've ever felt like you're failing as a parent, if you've ever wondered whether your kids would be better off without you, then you need to hear what happened next. Because sometimes the moment that almost breaks you apart is exactly what you need to rebuild everything stronger. Let me tell you about my family. I'm 42 years old, and for the past 2 years, I've been raising my 2 kids completely on my own. My son Jake is 17. He's a junior in high school with his father's stubborn streak and my tendency to bottle up emotions until they explode. He's got these intense brown eyes that used to light up when he saw me come home from work. But lately, they've been filled with nothing but anger and resentment. Then there's my daughter Amy, who just turned 14 last month. She's always been the peacekeeper in our family, the one who tries to smooth over the rough edges when Jake and I start going at each other. Amy has this gentle way about her. She'll bring me a cup of coffee when she sees I'm stressed, or she'll quietly do extra chores without being asked. Sometimes I look at her and worry that she's growing up too fast, trying to be the adult when I'm barely keeping it together myself. My brother Tom has been our lifeline since my ex-husband David walked out on us. Tom lives about 20 minutes away with his wife and 2 young kids, but he still makes time to help us whenever he can. He's the one who picks up Jake from school when I'm working late shifts, the one who shows up with groceries when money's tight, and the one who listens to me cry over the phone when everything feels impossible. Working as a nurse at Cleveland General Hospital used to be my calling. I loved helping people, being there during their most vulnerable moments, making a difference in someone's recovery. But these days, it feels more like survival than purpose. I'm pulling double shifts constantly, sometimes working 16 hours straight because we need every penny I can earn. The overtime pay is what keeps our lights on and food on the table, but it's also what's slowly killing my relationship with my kids. Our house is a small 3-bedroom ranch in a neighborhood that used to feel safe and welcoming. Now it feels like a battleground where Jake and I circle each other like wounded animals, both of us too proud and too hurt to back down. The walls seem to absorb our arguments, holding on to the tension until even Amy starts walking on eggshells around us. Jake wasn't always angry. 2 years ago, when his father decided that being a husband and dad was too much responsibility, Jake was still my little boy in many ways. He'd tell me about his day at school, ask for help with homework, and we'd watch movies together on weekends. But David's abandonment hit Jake harder than anyone expected. His grades started slipping, he quit the basketball team, and slowly but surely, he began building walls around himself that I couldn't seem to break through. The worst part is watching him struggle with feeling abandoned while simultaneously pushing me away. It's like he's testing me constantly, seeing if I'll give up on him like his father did. Every argument feels like he's daring me to prove that I don't really love him, that I'll eventually leave too. And lately, I've been so exhausted and overwhelmed that I haven't been giving him the patience and understanding he desperately needs. Amy watches all of this unfold with the wisdom of someone far beyond her 14 years. She sees how hard I'm working, how tired I am when I come home. She also sees how much pain Jake is in, even when he's being impossible. Sometimes I catch her looking between us with this worried expression, like she's trying to figure out how to fix something that feels increasingly broken. The financial pressure has been crushing. David pays some child support, but it's barely enough to cover groceries for a week. The mortgage, utilities, car payments, insurance, school supplies, clothes for growing teenagers. It all adds up faster than my paychecks can cover it. I've been putting off repairs around the house, buying generic everything at the grocery store, and even then, I'm behind on bills more often than I care to admit. My relationship with Jake has become this toxic cycle where his anger triggers my exhaustion and stress, which makes me snappy and impatient, which makes him even angrier. We're both hurting, both feeling abandoned and overwhelmed. But instead of supporting each other, we've been tearing each other apart. I know he needs more from me, more time, more patience, more emotional availability. But I've been running on empty for so long that I don't know how to give him what he needs. The night before our big fight, I just finished a particularly brutal shift at the hospital. We'd lost a patient, a teenager not much older than Jake who'd been in a car accident. I came home emotionally drained, only to find that Jake had been suspended from school for skipping classes and hadn't bothered to tell me. When I tried to talk to him about it, he just shrugged and said it didn't matter anyway. That's when I should have recognized the warning signs. Jake wasn't just being defiant, he was giving up. He was falling into the same pattern of self-destruction that I'd seen in so many families at the hospital. But I was too tired, too overwhelmed to see what was really happening. Instead of sitting down and really listening to him, I launched into another lecture about responsibility and consequences. Looking back now, I can see that we were both drowning. Jake was drowning in feelings of abandonment and worthlessness, while I was drowning in the impossible pressure of trying to be everything to everyone. We needed help, but neither of us knew how to ask for it. We needed connection, but we'd forgotten how to reach for each other without it turning into a fight. The morning that changed everything started like so many others, with me coming home exhausted from work, only to discover another problem that needed solving. But this time, instead of finding a way through it together, we both said things that cut so deep they nearly destroyed us. This time, Jake's anger and my desperation collided in a way that sent shockwaves through our entire family. What happened next would test every assumption we had about love, family, and what it really means to fight for each other. It would force us to confront our deepest fears and discover whether we had the courage to rebuild something beautiful from the broken pieces of our relationship. This is the story of how my family fell apart in a single moment, and how that same moment became the foundation for building something stronger than we ever thought possible. The alarm clock showed 7:30 a.m. when I finally pulled into our driveway after another grueling night shift at Cleveland General Hospital. My hands were still shaking slightly from the caffeine I'd consumed to stay alert during those final hours, and my scrubs were wrinkled from 14 straight hours of running between patient rooms. This was my reality now, coming home when most people were just starting their day, trying to switch from being a critical care nurse to being a mother without any time to decompose from the intensity of life and death decisions. As I sat in my car for a moment, I could see the morning light filtering through our kitchen window. I wondered if Jake was even awake yet, or if he'd already left for school without breakfast again. Amy would be getting ready, probably making sure her brother had everything he needed because that's the kind of kid she is, always taking care of everyone else. The weight of knowing that my 14-year-old daughter was essentially managing our household, because I was never there, settled heavily on my chest. Our neighborhood used to feel like a sanctuary. When David and I first bought this house 8 years ago, we had dreams of family barbecues, kids riding bikes in the driveway, and lazy Sunday mornings reading the newspaper together. Now, as I looked at our small ranch house with its chipped paint and overgrown lawn, it felt more like a reminder of everything I couldn't keep up with. The other houses on our street seemed to mock me with their well-maintained gardens and freshly painted shutters, evidence of families who had time and resources for the things I could only dream about. The financial pressure had been building for months, creating this constant low-level anxiety that colored everything I did. Just last week, I'd gotten another notice about our mortgage payment being late. The electric bill was sitting unopened on my kitchen counter because I was afraid to see how much we owed. Jake needed new shoes. His current ones had holes that he tried to hide from me, but I kept putting off the expense, hoping I could pick up an extra shift to cover it. Working at the hospital used to energize me. I'd chosen nursing because I wanted to make a difference, to be there for people during their most frightening and vulnerable moments. There's something powerful about being the calm presence in a crisis, about having the knowledge and skills to help someone heal. But lately, every shift felt like I was stealing time from my own children to take care of other people's families. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was helping other families stay together while my own was falling apart. My relationship with Jake had become the source of constant heartache. We used to be so close. When he was little, he'd wait by the window for me to come home from work, running to the door to tell me about his day. He'd help me make dinner, chattering about school friends and playground adventures. We'd do homework together at the kitchen table, and I'd braid Amy's hair while Jake worked on math problems beside us. Those moments felt like a lifetime ago. The change had been gradual at first, then sudden and devastating. When David left us 2 years ago, Jake internalized it as proof that he wasn't worth staying for. No matter how many times I tried to explain that his father's abandonment had nothing to do with him, Jake carried that rejection like a physical wound. He started questioning everything, why he should bother with school if even his own father didn't think he was worth the effort, why he should trust anyone when the most important man in his life had proven unreliable. What broke my heart most was watching Jake armor himself against further hurt by pushing away the people who loved him most. He'd test my limits constantly, as if he was trying to prove to himself that I'd eventually abandon him too. When I set boundaries, he'd explode with rage that seemed disproportionate to whatever rule he'd broken. When I tried to show affection, he'd withdraw and become sullen. It was like living with a wounded animal who'd forgotten how to accept help. Amy had become our family's emotional barometer, somehow sensing when to disappear into her room to avoid conflict and when to emerge with gentle intervention. She'd developed this way of speaking softly to both Jake and me when tensions were high, almost like she was diffusing a bomb. At 14, she shouldn't have been mediating between her mother and brother, but she'd naturally fallen into that role because someone had to try to keep us together. I'd been having conversations with my brother Tom about our situation, though I'd been careful not to reveal just how bad things had gotten. Tom had been incredible since David left, showing up for Jake's basketball games when I had to work, taking the kids for weekends when I needed to pick up extra shifts, and always being available when I needed someone to talk to. But I was terrified of admitting to him just how much I was struggling, afraid that if I said the words out loud, it would confirm my worst fear, that I was failing as a mother. The previous few weeks had been particularly difficult. Jake's school had called twice about missing assignments, and when I tried to address it with him, He'd accused me of caring more about what his teachers thought than about what he was going through. Amy had started having trouble sleeping, and I'd catch her staring out her bedroom window with this worried expression that reminded me too much of myself at her age. My own emotional state was more fragile than I wanted to admit. I'd started having thoughts that scared me, wondering if Jake and Amy might actually be better off living with Tom and his family, where they'd have stability and two parents who weren't constantly stressed about money. These thoughts would creep in during my quietest moments, usually during my commute to work, when I was alone with my fears and doubts. The night before our confrontation, I'd been caring for a teenage patient who'd attempted suicide. His mother had sat by his bedside, holding his hand and whispering apologies for not seeing the signs earlier. Watching her pain had triggered something in me, a recognition that I might be missing crucial signals from my own son. The parallel was too close for comfort, and I'd driven home that morning with a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I'd been putting off difficult conversations with both kids because I was afraid of the answers I might get. When was the last time Jake had told me about something good that happened to him? When was the last time Amy had asked me for help with something instead of just handling it herself? I was losing touch with their inner lives, becoming more of a provider than a parent, and the distance between us was growing every day. As I finally got out of my car that morning, I could see the pile of mail I'd been avoiding on our front porch, bills and notices that represented problems I didn't have solutions for. The grass needed cutting, the gutters needed cleaning, and there was still a loose board on our front steps that I kept meaning to fix. Everything around me felt like evidence of my inadequacy, reminders of all the ways I was falling short of being the mother my children deserved. Walking toward our front door, I tried to prepare myself for whatever drama the day might bring. Would Jake be awake and cooperative, or would I have to fight just to get him out of bed? Would Amy have eaten breakfast, or would she be too worried about the tension in our house to take care of herself? These had become the questions that shaped my mornings, replacing the simple joy I used to feel about coming home to my family. I had no idea that within the next hour, everything I thought I knew about our family would be tested in ways I never could have imagined. I couldn't have predicted that this ordinary Tuesday morning would become the catalyst for changes that would either save us or destroy us completely. All I knew was that I was tired of struggling, tired of failing, and tired of watching my children suffer because I couldn't figure out how to hold our family together. What I was about to discover was that sometimes the breaking point isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of something entirely different. The moment I stepped through our front door, I knew something was wrong. The house had that heavy, tense atmosphere that comes after secrets have been kept and lies have been told. Jake's backpack was thrown carelessly by the stairs, his shoes kicked off, and left exactly where they'd landed. Amy was sitting at the kitchen table with her homework spread out, but she looked up at me with those worried eyes that had become too familiar. "Where's your brother?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral, even though exhaustion was making everything feel more dramatic than it probably was. Amy glanced toward the stairs. "He's still in bed. Mom, the school called yesterday afternoon." My stomach dropped. In my family, phone calls from school were never good news. "What did they say?" "They wanted to talk to you about Jake's attendance. I told them you were at work." Amy's voice was small, like she was apologizing for being the messenger of bad news. I felt that familiar surge of frustration mixed with dread. How many calls had I missed while trying to save other people's families? How many warning signs had I been too busy to notice? Thank you for taking the message, sweetheart. I'll handle this. As I climbed the stairs to Jake's room, each step felt heavier than the last. I could hear music playing behind his closed door, some angry rap song with lyrics about feeling abandoned and misunderstood. The irony would have been funny if my heart wasn't breaking. I knocked gently at first. Jake, I need to talk to you. Silence. Then the music got louder. I knocked harder. Jake, open the door, now. I'm sleeping, he yelled back, though the defiance in his voice made it clear he was anything but asleep. We need to discuss the call from school. Open this door or I'm coming in. The music cut off abruptly, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps and an exaggerated sigh. When Jake finally opened the door, he looked like he'd been awake for hours. His hair was messy, but his eyes were alert and already filled with that defensive anger I'd come to dread. What? He said, blocking the doorway like he was protecting territory. The school called about your attendance. Want to tell me what's going on? Jake shrugged, that infuriating gesture that had become his default response to any serious conversation. I've been sick. For a week? Because that's how long you've been skipping, Jake. A whole week of school that I knew nothing about. You're never here anyway. How would you know what I'm doing? The words hit me like a physical blow, partly because there was truth in them. I'm working to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. You know that. Yeah, whatever. Dad's right. You make everything about money. When have you talked to your father? The question came out sharper than I intended. David had been mostly absent from our lives since the divorce, popping in occasionally with promises he never kept and criticism he never earned the right to give. He called last week, said I could come stay with him if things got too intense here. Something cold and furious started building in my chest. David, who paid minimal child support and hadn't attended a single school event in 2 years, was now offering to rescue Jake from the life I was killing myself to provide. And what did you tell him? I told him I'd think about it. Jake's chin lifted defiantly. Maybe I should. At least he doesn't make me feel guilty for breathing. That's not fair, Jake, and you know it. Fair? Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. What's fair about any of this? What's fair about coming home to an empty house every day because you're always at work? What's fair about having to take care of Amy because you're too tired to be a real mom when you are here? Each word was like a knife twisting in my chest. Everything I do is for you and Amy. I'm killing myself trying to keep us together as a family. Well, maybe you should just stop trying. Jake's voice cracked with emotion he was trying to hide behind anger. Maybe Dad was right to leave. Maybe we'd all be better off if you just gave up. Is that really what you think? I could hear my own voice getting louder, could feel 2 years of exhaustion and frustration boiling over. You think I work 16-hour shifts because I want to? You think I choose to miss your games and school events because I don't care? I think you use work as an excuse to avoid dealing with real problems, Jake shot back. When's the last time you actually sat down and talked to me about anything that mattered? When's the last time you asked how I'm doing instead of just lecturing me about what I'm doing wrong? The accusation stung because it held too much truth. When had our conversations become nothing but corrections and criticism? When had I stopped seeing my son and started seeing only problems to solve? I'm trying my best here, Jake. I know it's not perfect, but I'm doing everything I can. Your best sucks. The words exploded out of him with years of pent-up pain. Your best is being tired all the time and stressed about money and making everyone walk on eggshells because you might snap at any second. Don't you dare talk to me like that. My own composure finally cracked. I didn't choose for your father to abandon us. I didn't choose to do this alone. But I'm here, Jake. Every single day I'm here trying to hold this family together while you do everything possible to tear it apart. Maybe that's because this family isn't worth holding together, Jake screamed, and I could see tears starting to form in his eyes even as his face contorted with rage. Maybe Dad had the right idea. Maybe this whole thing is just too broken to fix. Jake, stop. Amy's voice came from behind me, small and frightened. She'd come upstairs, probably drawn by the volume of our fight. Please don't fight like this. But we were both too far gone to stop. 2 years of grief, abandonment, financial stress, and missed connections had finally found their outlet, and neither of us could pull back from the edge we'd created. You want to know the truth? Jake continued, his voice getting more vicious with each word. The truth is that Dad was smart to get out before you dragged him down too. The truth is that you're so busy trying to be some kind of martyr that you've forgotten how to actually be a mom. The truth is that we'd probably all be happier if you just disappeared like he did. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Jake seemed shocked by what he'd said, but it was too late to take it back. The words hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud, poisoning everything they touched. You want me to disappear? I whispered, feeling something fundamental break inside my chest. Fine. Maybe that's exactly what I should do. Mom, no. Amy stepped between us, tears streaming down her face. He doesn't mean it. Nobody means it. But Jake wasn't done. The pain in his eyes had transformed into something cold and final. Yeah, maybe I do mean it. Maybe we'd all be better off if you just stopped pretending to care and let someone else take care of us for a change. Jake, Amy's voice was desperate now. Stop saying things like that. But something had snapped in both of us. I looked at my son, this young man who used to run to me when he was hurt, who used to tell me I was the best mom in the world, and all I could see was someone who genuinely seemed to hate me. Someone who thought I was the problem instead of the solution. You know what? I said, my voice eerily calm after all the shouting. Maybe you're right. Maybe I am the problem. Mom, please don't say that. Amy was crying harder now, caught between trying to comfort me and trying to reason with her brother. Jake looked at both of us with disgust. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Everything has to be about your feelings, about how hard your life is. Well, guess what? We're all suffering here. The argument had reached a point where neither of us could hear the other anymore. We were both operating from such deep wells of pain that every word was designed to wound rather than heal. I could see the scared little boy hiding behind Jake's anger, but I was too hurt and too tired to reach for him the way I should have. If that's how you really feel, I said, then maybe we need to make some changes around here. Fine by me, Jake spat back. I'll call Dad right now. You do that, I replied, knowing that David would disappoint him just like he'd disappointed all of us, but too angry to protect Jake from that inevitable hurt. That's when Jake did something he'd never done before. He pulled back his foot and kicked our front door with all the force of his 17-year-old fury and pain. The sound was like a gunshot in our small house, followed by the crack of wood splitting around the frame. I hate this place, he screamed. I hate this house, and I hate this family, and I wish you were dead so I could just be done with all of this. Then he was gone, slamming the broken door behind him so hard that the whole house seemed to shake. Amy and I stood in the sudden silence, both of us staring at the splintered door frame that seemed to symbolize everything that had just broken between us. I had never felt so alone in my entire life. The silence that followed Jake's departure was deafening. Amy and I stood frozen in our hallway, staring at the splintered door frame like it might somehow explain what had just happened to our family. The front door hung slightly crooked on its hinges, unable to close properly, letting in the cool morning air that made me shiver, though I wasn't sure if it was from the temperature or from the shock of Jake's words still echoing in my mind. I wish you were dead so I could just be done with all of this. Those words played on repeat in my head, each repetition feeling like another physical blow. In all our fights, in all the difficult moments since David left, Jake had never said anything so cruel, so final. And the worst part was that underneath my hurt and anger, a small voice was whispering that maybe he was right. Maybe they would be better off without me. Amy reached for my hand tentatively, her face streaked with tears. Mom, he didn't mean it. You know he didn't mean it. But I was having trouble focusing on her words. The adrenaline from our fight was starting to fade, leaving behind a crushing sense of failure that felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. I looked around our small house, the pile of unpaid bills on the counter, the dishes I hadn't had time to wash, the laundry overflowing from the basket, and all I could see was evidence of my inadequacy as a mother. Maybe he did mean it, I whispered, more to myself than to Amy. Maybe I have been making everyone miserable. Mom, no. Amy squeezed my hand tighter. You're working so hard for us. Jake's just hurt because of Dad. He's taking it out on you because you're the one who's actually here. But Amy's wisdom, mature beyond her 14 years, only made me feel worse. Why was my daughter comforting me? Why was she the one trying to hold our family together when that should be my job? The role reversal felt like another confirmation that I was failing at the most important job I'd ever had. I sank onto our living room couch, feeling older than my 42 years. The exhaustion from my night shift was combining with the emotional devastation of our fight, creating a fog in my brain that made it hard to think clearly. Amy sat beside me, curled into my side like she used to when she was little and scared of thunderstorms. What if Jake's right? I asked quietly. What if you'd both be better off with Uncle Tom? He can provide stability, consistency. His kids have 2 parents who are actually present. Stop talking like that, Amy said firmly, but I could hear the fear in her voice. We're a family. Families stick together. Are we, though? A family? I laughed bitterly. Jake can't stand to be in the same room with me. I'm working so much that I barely know what's happening in either of your lives. When's the last time we all sat down for dinner together? When's the last time we did something fun as a family? Amy was quiet for a long moment, and I knew she was trying to remember too. The silence was answer enough. I feel like I'm drowning, I continued, the words spilling out like water through a broken dam. Every day I'm barely keeping my head above water, and instead of getting better, it just keeps getting worse. The bills keep piling up, Jake keeps getting angrier, and I keep failing at everything that matters. You're not failing, Amy protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Look around, sweetheart. Really look. Is this the kind of home you and Jake deserve? Is this the kind of mother you deserve? Amy didn't answer, which was answer enough. That's when the thought that had been lurking in the shadows of my mind for weeks finally stepped into the light. Maybe the most loving thing I could do for my children was to admit that I couldn't give them what they needed. Maybe the bravest thing I could do was step aside and let someone else, someone better, take care of them. I need to make a phone call, I said, standing up abruptly. Mom, where are you going? Amy's voice was small and frightened. I'm going to call Uncle Tom. I walked to the kitchen and picked up my phone with shaking hands. Tom answered on the second ring, his voice warm and concerned. Lisa, how are you doing? Tom, I need you to come get Amy." The words came out in a rush before I could lose my nerve. "I can't do this anymore. I'm failing them, and they deserve better than what I can give them." "Whoa, slow down. What happened? Are you okay?" "No, I'm not okay. I'm the opposite of okay." I looked out the kitchen window at our neglected backyard, seeing it as more evidence of my shortcomings. "Jake and I just had the worst fight we've ever had. He told me he wished I was dead, Tom." My own son wishes I was dead. Kids say things they don't mean when they're angry. You know that. But what if he does mean it? What if I'm actually making their lives worse by trying so hard to keep us together? Tom was quiet for a moment, and I could hear his concern even through the phone. "Lisa, you're scaring me. What are you thinking about doing?" I closed my eyes and forced myself to say the words. "I'm thinking about letting them live with you, permanently. They need stability. They need two parents who can actually be present. I can't give them that. Where is this coming from? You're an amazing mother. Those kids adore you. Jake doesn't adore me. Jake can barely stand to look at me, and Amy shouldn't have to be the mediator in her own family. She shouldn't have to take care of everyone else because I'm too exhausted to do my job. Lisa, listen to me. You're overwhelmed and you're hurt, but running away isn't the solution." "I'm not running away," I said, though even as I said it, I knew that wasn't entirely true. "I'm making a sacrifice. I'm putting their needs before my own feelings. What about your needs? What about the fact that you love them and they love you?" Love isn't enough, Tom. Love doesn't pay the bills or create stability or fix broken teenagers. I thought it would be, but I was wrong. "Lisa, please don't make any big decisions while you're upset. Let me come over and we can talk about this properly." But I was already moving, my mind made up with the kind of clarity that comes from finally accepting a painful truth. "I need you to pick up Amy in an hour. Can you do that for me?" "Of course, but Lisa..." "Thank you. I love you, Tom. Take care of them for me." I hung up before he could argue further, then looked around our kitchen with new eyes. If I was really going to do this, I needed to make sure Amy and Jake would be okay without me. I needed to write them letters explaining my decision, needed to leave them with all the practical information they'd need. Moving like someone in a trance, I gathered paper and pens from the junk drawer. My hands were surprisingly steady as I began to write, starting with Jake's letter because his was going to be the hardest. "My dear Jake," I began, then stopped. "How do you explain to your child that you love them enough to leave them? How do you put into words the impossible choice between staying and potentially making things worse, or leaving and giving them a chance at something better?" I tried again. "Jake, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. But I need you to understand that this isn't about anger or punishment. This is about love, the kind of love that sometimes requires the hardest sacrifices." The words flowed more easily after that, 2 years of unspoken feelings and fears pouring onto the page. I told him about watching him struggle with his father's abandonment, about seeing his pain and not knowing how to fix it. I told him about my own failures, about how my exhaustion and stress had made me impatient when he needed understanding. I told him that Uncle Tom would take better care of him than I ever could, that he deserved parents who could be fully present for his life. Amy's letter was shorter, but no less difficult. I tried to explain that her maturity and kindness weren't burdens she should have to carry, that she deserved to be a child instead of a caretaker. I told her how proud I was of the young woman she was becoming, but how sorry I was that she'd had to grow up so fast. As I wrote, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of purpose and clarity. This wasn't about giving up. This was about making the ultimate sacrifice for my children's well-being. Tom and his wife could provide the stability and consistency that I couldn't. They had a bigger house, financial security, and most importantly, they weren't drowning in the day-to-day struggle of survival. I packed a small bag with essentials, just enough for a few days while I figured out my next steps. My plan was to drive to my childhood friend Sue's cabin in rural Pennsylvania, a place where I could think clearly about what came next. Maybe I'd figure out how to become the mother my children deserved. Maybe I'd find a way to rebuild my life so I could be worthy of them again. The letters sat on the kitchen table like goodbye notes, which I suppose they were. I left Tom's contact information and detailed instructions about school, medical information, and everything else Amy and Jake would need to know. Then I took one last look around the house that had held so much love and so much pain. In the living room, I stopped at our photo wall, pictures of happier times when we were still a complete family, and later photos of just the three of us learning to be okay without David. There was one picture in particular that made my breath catch. Jake at 8 years old, gap-toothed and grinning. His arms wrapped around my neck after I'd surprised him by coming to his school lunch. He'd been so happy to see me then, so proud to introduce me to his friends as my mom. When had that little boy disappeared? When had he stopped being happy to see me? Maybe, if I was brave enough to leave, he'd have a chance to be happy again. 3 hours later, Jake stood on the sidewalk in front of his father's apartment complex, staring up at the building where David lived his new life, a life that apparently had no room for the children he'd left behind. The walk from our house had given Jake time to think, time for his anger to cool into something more like regret. But it was too late to take back the words he'd thrown at me like weapons. The apartment building was nicer than our house, newer, with a doorman and a gym that David had mentioned during one of his rare phone calls. Jake had spent the entire walk imagining the conversation he'd have with his father, the way David would welcome him and validate all his complaints about me. In his mind, his father would be the understanding parent, the one who would see how impossible I'd become. But when Jake finally worked up the courage to knock on apartment 4B, the man who opened the door looked annoyed rather than pleased to see his son. "Jake, what are you doing here?" David was dressed for work, checking his watch like Jake's unexpected visit was an inconvenience. "You said I could come stay with you if things got too intense at home." Jake's voice was smaller than he'd intended, suddenly feeling like a little kid asking for something he wasn't sure he deserved. David glanced back into his apartment, where Jake could hear a woman's voice asking who was at the door. "I said you could call if you needed to talk. I didn't say you could just show up." "Dad, I really need this. Mom and I had a huge fight, and I said some things." Jake's confidence was evaporating with each word. "I just need somewhere to stay for a while. Jake, you can't just run away every time you and your mother have an argument. That's not how real life works." David's tone was the same one he'd used when Jake was younger and had come to him with problems, dismissive, like childhood struggles weren't worth adult attention. "This wasn't just an argument," Jake protested. "This was different. We said things that can't be taken back." David sighed heavily, like Jake was being dramatic. "Look, your mother might be stressed and difficult sometimes, but she's the one taking care of you day in and day out. She's the one who shows up, Jake. I send a check twice a month and see you every few weeks if I'm lucky. Who do you think is actually putting in the work here?" The words hit Jake like cold water. This wasn't the validation he'd expected, wasn't the rescue he'd been hoping for. "But you said," "I said a lot of things when I was angry at your mother, but but that doesn't mean I can just take you in every time things get tough at home." David checked his watch again. "I have to get to work, and Sarah's moving in this weekend. This isn't a good time for extended visits." Sarah. Jake had heard the name before but hadn't realized how serious David's new relationship had become. Another piece of his fantasy crumbled. Not only was his father unwilling to help, but he was building a new family that didn't include his old one. "So, that's it?" Jake's voice cracked with the weight of a second abandonment in one day. "You're just going to send me back?" "I'm telling you to go home and apologize to your mother. She's working herself to death trying to provide for you and Amy, and instead of appreciating that, you're here complaining about how hard your life is." David's words were harsh, but not entirely wrong. "You have no idea how good you have it, Jake. Your mother could have given up on you a long time ago, but she's still there fighting for your family." The walk back to our house took forever. Each step felt heavier than the last as Jake replayed both conversations, the terrible fight with me and the crushing rejection from his father. The anger that had fueled his dramatic exit was gone, replaced by shame and a growing panic about what he'd find when he got home. By the time Jake reached our street, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. Our house looked different somehow, smaller and more fragile than when he'd left. The broken front door stood slightly ajar, unable to close properly after he'd damaged it in his rage. "Mom?" Jake called as he stepped through the doorway. "Mom, I'm home. I'm sorry." Silence. The house felt empty in a way that went beyond just being quiet. There was an absence that Jake could feel in his bones, a stillness that made his stomach drop with dread. "Mom? Amy?" He checked the living room, then the kitchen, his panic growing with each empty space. That's when he saw them. 2 envelopes sitting on the kitchen table like tombstones, his name written on one in my familiar handwriting. Jake's hands shook as he tore open the envelope, his eyes racing across the words that would change everything he thought he knew about our family. "My dear Jake, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. But I need you to understand that this isn't about anger or punishment. This is about love, the kind of love that sometimes requires the hardest sacrifices. I've been watching you struggle since your father left, and I've been failing you in ways I'm only now beginning to understand. You needed patience when I gave you lectures. You needed understanding when I gave you criticism. You needed a mother who could be fully present when I could only offer you the exhausted scraps of my attention. You were right about everything you said today. I have been making everyone miserable with my stress and my failures. I have been too tired and too overwhelmed to be the mother you deserve. And most painfully, I have been so focused on surviving day to day that I forgot to help you heal from the wounds your father left behind. Uncle Tom will take care of you and Amy now. He can provide the stability and consistency that I couldn't. He has a loving family, financial security, and most importantly, he won't be drowning in the day-to-day struggle just to keep your heads above water. I know you're angry with me, and maybe you should be, but I need you to know that every decision I've made, every extra shift I've worked, every sacrifice I've tried to make has been because I love you more than my own life. That love is why I'm leaving now, because staying would mean continuing to fail you, and I can't do that anymore. Take care of Amy. Help Uncle Tom understand what you both need. And please, try to remember that your father's leaving had nothing to do with your worth as a person. You are brilliant, strong, and deserving of all the love in the world. I hope someday you'll understand that this is the most loving thing I could do for you. All my love, always. Mom P.S. Uncle Tom has all the information you'll need. Amy is already with him. Call him immediately when you find this." Jake read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. Then he was running through the house, checking every room, every closet, anywhere I might be hiding. But the evidence was everywhere. My clothes were gone from the bedroom, my toiletries missing from the bathroom, even my favorite coffee mug absent from the kitchen sink. I was really gone. Jake collapsed onto my bed, clutching the letter and finally understanding the full weight of what had happened. In his anger, he'd said the cruelest things he could think of, and I had taken them as truth. He'd wished me dead, and I'd responded by disappearing from his life completely. But worse than the guilt was the realization of what he'd lost. David's rejection had shown Jake the difference between a parent who shows up and one who doesn't, between someone who fights for you and someone who gives up when things get difficult. I had been fighting for our family every single day, working impossible hours and sacrificing my own needs to keep us together. And in return, Jake had torn me down with words designed to destroy. His phone rang, Uncle Tom calling, probably wondering where Jake was. But before Jake could face his uncle, before he could confront the reality of our shattered family, he needed to process what the letter had revealed about his own role in our destruction. For the first time since David left, Jake cried, not the angry tears of a frustrated teenager, but the broken sobs of someone who had finally understood the difference between having a parent who disappoints you and losing a parent who loves you completely. Jake called Tom with trembling fingers. "Uncle Tom, it's Jake. I found the letters." "Where? Where did she go?" "We've been trying to reach her for hours." Tom's voice was tight with worry. "But I think I know where she might be. Pack a bag, Jake. We're going to bring your mother home." "What if she doesn't want to come home? What if she's better off without us?" "Jake, your mother didn't leave because she stopped loving you. She left because she loves you too much to watch herself fail you. There's a difference, and it's time we showed her that she wasn't failing at all." As Jake threw clothes into a backpack, he rehearsed all the things he wanted to say to me. The apologies, the explanations, the promises to do better. But mostly, he wanted to tell me the truth that had taken his father's rejection to reveal, that he'd rather have an imperfect mother who loved him completely than a perfect father who couldn't be bothered to try. The drive to find me would be the longest 3 hours of Jake's life, but also the most important, because somewhere in those dark highways my son would finally understand what it means to fight for someone you love, even when you're the reason they're hurting. The sunrise over Sue's cabin was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in months, but I barely noticed it. I'd been sitting on the old wooden porch since about 4 in the morning, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like my childhood friend's lavender detergent, watching the sky slowly lighten while I tried to convince myself I'd made the right choice. The cabin was exactly as I remembered it from our college days, rustic and peaceful, surrounded by tall pine trees that blocked out most of the world's noise. Sue had given me the spare key years ago, telling me I was welcome anytime I needed to escape. I'd never imagined I'd use it to escape from my own children. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I'd arrived the night before. 17 missed calls from Tom, 12 from Amy, and even 2 from numbers I didn't recognize. I'd turned off the ringer around midnight, but I could still see the screen lighting up every few minutes, like a beacon of guilt in the darkness. What if there was an emergency? What if Amy needed me? What if Jake had tried to call his father again and been rejected a second time? These thoughts had kept me awake all night, second-guessing every decision that had led me to this moment. The sound of car doors slamming in the gravel driveway made me look up from my coffee cup. It was barely 6 in the morning. Who could possibly be here this early? But as 3 figures emerged from Tom's SUV, my heart stopped. Jake was running toward the porch like his life depended on it. His face streaked with tears I hadn't seen since he was a little boy. Behind him, Amy was crying too, and Tom looked like he'd been driving all night, which he probably had. "Mom," Jake's voice broke on the word as he took the porch steps 2 at a time. "Mom, please don't leave us. Please." I stood up so quickly that my coffee cup crashed to the wooden planks, shattering into pieces that seemed to symbolize everything broken in our family. Jake threw his arms around me with a force that nearly knocked me over, holding on like he was afraid I might disappear again. "I'm so sorry," he sobbed into my shoulder. "I didn't mean any of it. I was angry and hurt, and I said terrible things, but I didn't mean them. Please come home." Amy joined our embrace, her small arms wrapping around both of us. "We need you, Mom. We're a family. Families don't give up on each other." For a long moment, we just held each other on that porch while Tom watched from a respectful distance. I could feel Jake's whole body shaking with sobs, could hear Amy whispering, "Please, don't leave us," over and over again. And for the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. I felt needed, not as a provider or a problem solver, but as a mother. "How did you find me?" I asked when we finally pulled apart. "Tom remembered you talking about this place," Jake said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Mom, I went to Dad's house." My heart clenched. What happened? "He didn't want me." Jake's voice was small and broken. "He said he was too busy, that Sarah was moving in, that I needed to go home and appreciate what I have. He made me realize something I should have known all along." "What's that?" "That you're the one who stays. You're the one who fights for us every single day, even when we make it impossible. Dad walks away when things get hard, but you never have. Even when I said those horrible things to you, even when I told you I wished you were dead, you didn't abandon us. You left because you thought it would make our lives better, not because you stopped caring." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't noticed before. The anger that had been radiating from him for months was gone, replaced by understanding and genuine remorse. Somewhere in the past 12 hours, my teenage boy had grown up in ways I hadn't expected. "Jake, I need you to understand something," I said, taking his hands in mine. "When you said those things yesterday, it felt like confirmation of every fear I'd been carrying. I'd been so afraid that I was failing you both, that my stress and exhaustion were making your lives worse instead of better." "You weren't failing us," Amy said firmly. "We were failing you. I should have told you how much we appreciate everything you do. I should have helped more, complained less. No, sweetheart, you're 14 years old. It's not your job to manage our family's emotional health." Tom stepped onto the porch then, his expression gentle but serious. "Lisa, can I say something?" I nodded, grateful for his steady presence in our chaotic family drama. "You've been carrying this load alone for 2 years, trying to be everything to everyone. But families work best when everyone contributes according to their ability. Jake is 17, old enough to take on real responsibility. Amy is mature enough to understand what's happening and help in age-appropriate ways. And you deserve support, not just from me, but from your own children. I don't want them to have to grow up too fast because I can't handle things on my own," I protested. "There's a difference between burdening children with adult responsibilities and teaching them to be contributing members of a family," Tom continued. "Jake, what did you learn about yourself in the past day?" Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking. I learned that I've been taking out my anger about Dad on Mom because she's safe. I knew she wouldn't leave me like he did, so I felt like I could say anything to her without consequences. But that wasn't fair. She deserved my respect and appreciation, not my anger. "And what are you going to do differently?" Tom pressed. "I want to help more around the house. I want to get a part-time job so Mom doesn't have to work so many extra shifts. And I want to start family therapy so we can learn how to communicate better when we're upset instead of just hurting each other." I stared at my son in amazement. This was the boy who just yesterday had been screaming about how much he hated our family. "Jake, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted. "I do have to, because you're my mom, and I love you, and I've been treating you like you're the enemy when you're actually the person who's been fighting hardest to keep us together." Amy spoke up then, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. "I want us to move in with Uncle Tom for a while, not because you're failing, Mom, but because we all need some support right now. And I think it would be good for us to see what a stable family looks like so we can learn how to be one ourselves." The wisdom in my daughter's words took my breath away. She was right. We needed help, but that didn't mean we were broken beyond repair. It meant we were smart enough to accept support when it was offered. "What do you think?" Tom asked me. "My guest room is yours for as long as you need it, and having you three around would be good for my kids too. They adore their cousins." I looked at my children, really looked at them, and saw not the sources of stress and failure I'd been perceiving, but two incredible young people who were strong enough to handle honest conversations about our challenges and mature enough to be part of the solutions. "I think," I said slowly, "that this family is worth fighting for. But I also think we need to fight for it together, not just expect one person to carry all the weight." Jake nodded eagerly. "I'm ready to fight for us, Mom. I'm ready to be the kind of son you deserve." "You already are," I told him, meaning it completely. "You came after me. You fought to bring me home. That's exactly the kind of son I raised you to be." 6 months later, our life looked completely different but felt infinitely better. Living with Tom's family had given us the breathing room we needed to rebuild our relationships without the constant pressure of financial stress. I'd been able to reduce my hours at the hospital, which meant I was present for more of Jake and Amy's daily lives. Jake had gotten a job at the local grocery store and was contributing part of his paycheck to our family savings account, not because I required it, but because he wanted to feel like he was helping build our future. His grades had improved dramatically, and he'd even rejoined the basketball team. Amy had blossomed in the stable environment, making new friends and pursuing interests she'd put on hold during our crisis. She still had that natural tendency to take care of others, but now it felt like a gift rather than a burden. We'd been going to family therapy every week, learning how to communicate our needs and frustrations without attacking each other. Dr. Martinez had helped us understand that conflict in families is normal. It's how you handle the conflict that determines whether it destroys relationships or strengthens them. The door frame at our old house still bore a small crack from the day Jake kicked it. When we moved back into our own place the following spring, we decided to keep that crack as a reminder. Not a reminder of our failure, but a reminder of how close we came to losing each other and how much we were willing to fight to stay together. Sometimes people ask me if I regret leaving that day, if I think it was a mistake to scare my children the way I did. But honestly, I think it was the wake-up call we all needed. Jake needed to understand the difference between a parent who fights for you and one who gives up. Amy needed to see that she didn't have to be perfect to be loved. And I needed to learn that asking for help isn't the same as admitting failure. The most important lesson we learned is that love alone isn't enough to sustain a family. You also need communication, respect, and the willingness to keep showing up for each other even when it's hard. You need to fight for each other, not against each other. Today, Jake is a senior in high school with college plans and a job he's proud of. Amy is thriving academically and socially, secure in the knowledge that our family is stable. And I've found a balance between providing for my children and being present in their lives. We're not perfect, no family is, but we're real, and we're committed to each other in ways we never were before our crisis. Sometimes the thing that almost breaks your family apart is exactly what you need to build it back stronger. That broken door taught us that running away, whether it's slamming out in anger or disappearing in despair, never solves anything. The courage is in staying and fighting for each other, in being willing to change and grow and forgive. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do for the people you love is to show them exactly how much they mean to you by refusing to give up on your family, even when everything seems hopeless. Because in the end, we don't need perfect families. We just need families that are willing to keep trying, keep loving, and keep fighting for each other, no matter what.